Have you ever noticed how some people apologize for taking up space? Not just for mistakes they've made, but for existing, for speaking, for asking questions, for having needs. Sorry, can I just squeeze past you? Sorry, I know you're busy, but sorry for bothering you with this. Sorry, I'm so sorry. There's something strange about watching someone apologize for things that aren't their fault, aren't their responsibility, and sometimes aren't even problems at all. It's like watching someone flinch at shadows, and if you're that person, if you find the word sorry leaving your lips a dozen times a day, you might not even realize you're doing it anymore. But here's what's fascinating. Excessive apologizing isn't actually about being polite. It's not even really about remorse. It's about something much deeper, much older, and much more painful. So what makes someone apologize for their own existence? And why can't they stop? Let's start with what this actually looks like. Because if you're someone who over-apologizes, you've probably been told to stop. You don't need to say sorry so much, people tell you. And you know they're right. You know it rationally. But the apologies keep coming anyway. You apologize when someone bumps into you, when you ask for help, when you share an opinion, when you take your turn to speak, when you cry, when you're sick, when someone treats you badly and you inconvenience them by having feelings about it. You apologize for apologizing. And here's the thing, it doesn't feel like a choice. It feels automatic, reflexive, like your mouth forms the word before your brain even processes what's happening. The apology is out before you can stop it. And sometimes you don't even know what you're apologizing for. To outside observers, it might seem like excessive politeness, low self-esteem, a quirky habit. But the truth is far more complex. Here's what's really happening. Compulsive apologizing is a survival mechanism. It's not a personality flaw. It's an adaptation. Let me explain. When you grow up in an environment where love feels conditional, where approval must be earned, where your needs are treated as burdens, you learn something fundamental about how the world works. You learn that your existence is an imposition, that your value must be constantly proven, that taking up space requires justification, and the apology becomes your shield. Psychologists call this hypervigilance. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for signs of displeasure, rejection, or anger in others. You're reading micro-expressions, monitoring tone of voice, calculating the emotional temperature of every room you enter. And at the slightest hint that someone might be upset or might potentially become upset, you apologize. Because somewhere, sometime, you learned that preemptive apologies could protect you. That if you apologized first, you might avoid criticism, avoid anger, avoid abandonment. And this is where it gets complex, because this pattern almost always begins in childhood. Maybe you grew up with a parent who was unpredictable, whose mood shifted like weather, happy one moment, explosive the next, and you learned to read the signs. You learned to make yourself small. You learned that your needs could trigger anger, so you apologized for having them. Or maybe you had a parent who was constantly overwhelmed, who treated your ordinary childhood needs, attention, comfort, help, as burdens they couldn't bear. And you learned that your existence was exhausting to others, that loving you was hard work, that you needed to apologize for requiring care. Or perhaps you were the sensitive child in a family that valued toughness, the one who cried easily, felt deeply, needed more reassurance. And you learned that your emotions were too much, too intense, too inconvenient. So you apologized for feeling. Attachment theory tells us that children are wired to attach to their caregivers no matter what. It's survival. And when attachment feels insecure, when love feels conditional or unpredictable, children don't blame their parents. They blame themselves. They think, if I could just be better, quieter, easier, less needy, then I'd be loved the way I need to be loved. The apology becomes a way of saying, I know I'm flawed. I know I'm too much. But please don't leave me. But here's what's fascinating from a neuroscience perspective. These patterns become hardwired. Your brain literally forms neural pathways around this behavior. Every time you apologized and it worked, every time it diffused tension, prevented conflict, or earned you a moment of approval, your brain reinforced that pathway. It learned. Apologizing equals safety. And over time, this becomes automatic. Your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, becomes hyperactive. It perceives threats where none exist. Someone's neutral expression reads as displeasure. A moment of silence reads as rejection. A simple request from you feels like an unreasonable demand. And before your prefrontal cortex, your rational brain, can assess the situation, you've already apologized. This is why people can tell you to stop apologizing, and it doesn't help. Because this isn't happening in the rational part of your brain. It's happening in the survival part. The part that's trying to keep you safe from dangers it learned to fear a long time ago. And this is where it gets interesting. Because excessive apologizing serves multiple functions that most people don't recognize. First, it's a form of control, not over others, over yourself. When you apologize constantly, you're trying to manage other people's emotions before they even have them. You're attempting to prevent rejection by rejecting yourself first. It's like saying, I know I'm not good enough, so you don't need to tell me. Second, it's a test. Every apology is a question. Am I still acceptable? Am I still wanted? Is it still okay that I'm here? You're seeking reassurance, but in a way that feels safe. Because directly asking, do you still like me, feels too vulnerable, too needy, too much. Third, it's a form of self-punishment. If you internalize the message that you're too much, too sensitive, too needy, then apologizing becomes a way of acknowledging your perceived flaws. It's how you atone for the crime of being yourself. But here's the truth. None of this is actually protecting you. It's just making you smaller. Because here's what happens over time. Constant apologizing doesn't just affect how others see you. It affects how you see yourself. Every time you apologize for something that doesn't warrant an apology, you're sending a message to your own brain. I am in the wrong. My needs are illegitimate. My presence is a burden. You're reinforcing the very belief that's causing the behavior in the first place. And people start to relate to you differently. Not necessarily in the way you fear. Most people aren't consciously judging you for apologizing. But something subtle happens. When you constantly minimize yourself, others may unconsciously begin to minimize you too. Your opinions carry less weight. Your needs become optional. Your boundaries become negotiable. You've trained people to expect that you'll always bend, always accommodate, always apologize. And then when you can't, when you finally stand firm, it feels like betrayal, because you've set a precedent that you don't matter as much as everyone else. The apology that was meant to protect you becomes the thing that makes you invisible. And this plays out painfully in relationships. Because healthy relationships require reciprocity. They require both people to take up space, to have needs, to sometimes be inconvenient, to be imperfect and still worthy of love. But if you apologize for your existence, you can't have that kind of relationship. Instead, you create a dynamic where you're always the one at fault, always the one who needs to do better, always the one who's grateful that the other person tolerates you. You might attract people who like that dynamic, people who want someone who won't challenge them, won't have expectations, won't ask for too much, and you'll stay in those relationships longer than you should because you believe they're the best you deserve. Or you might push away people who could love you well, because when someone treats you with genuine kindness, without you having to apologize for existing, it feels wrong, foreign, suspicious. You don't trust it. You wait for the other shoe to drop. And sometimes, unconsciously, you sabotage it, because their acceptance contradicts your core belief about yourself. The psychology behind this runs deeper than most people realize. There's actually research showing that people with insecure attachment styles have difficulty accepting love even when it's offered freely, because accepting it would mean confronting the painful truth that maybe you were always worthy of love, that maybe you didn't need to make yourself small, that maybe you were apologizing for nothing, and that realization can feel like grief for all the years you spent diminished, for all the times you apologized when you should have been angry, for all the space you didn't take up, all the needs you didn't express, all the times you said sorry when what you meant was, please see me. But here's the thing about patterns formed in childhood. They can be reformed. The brain that learned to over-apologize can learn a different way. It starts with awareness, not the awareness other people give you, you apologize too much, but the deeper awareness of what's driving it. When you feel that reflexive sorry forming, pause just for a second. Ask yourself, what am I actually afraid will happen if I don't apologize? What am I trying to prevent? Usually the answer is rejection, anger, abandonment, the things you learned to fear when you were too young to understand that they weren't your fault. And here's what you need to know. The people who matter won't reject you for taking up space. The people who are safe won't punish you for having needs. And the people who get angry when you stop apologizing for existing, they were never your people anyway. You can practice replacing apologies with other words. Thank you for your patience instead of sorry for taking so long. Excuse me instead of sorry to bother you. Or sometimes just letting the moment pass without comment, without apology, without making yourself small. Music. And you can start to notice the situations where you don't apologize. Because I'm willing to bet there are some. Maybe when you're with certain people who make you feel safe. Maybe when you're doing something you're confident in. Maybe when you're alone. Those moments prove something crucial. This isn't who you are. It's what you learned. And what was learned can be unlearned. Because the real tragedy isn't just that you apologize too much. It's what you're apologizing for. You're apologizing for being human, for having needs and feelings and boundaries, for taking up the space that's already yours, for asking for what every person deserves. And somewhere along the way, someone made you believe that your ordinary human needs were extraordinary burdens, that your normal feelings were too much, that your very presence required justification. But here's the truth they didn't tell you. You don't need to earn your space. You don't need to justify your existence. You don't need to apologize for being a person with needs and feelings and limits. The people who taught you that you were too much, they were wrong. Not unkind, necessarily, not malicious. Often they were carrying their own wounds, repeating patterns they learned from someone else, but wrong nonetheless. You were never too much. You were just surrounded by people who didn't have enough capacity. And children always blame themselves because it's safer than accepting that the adults who are supposed to protect them are fallible. And maybe this is the real work, not just stopping the apologies, but excavating the belief beneath them. The belief that says you must earn love. That says your value is conditional. That says you must be perfect to be acceptable. That belief is the wound. The apologies are just the symptom. And healing means building a new belief, one that says, I'm allowed to exist as I am. I'm allowed to have needs. I'm allowed to make mistakes. I'm allowed to take up space, not because I've earned it, not because I'm perfect, but because I'm human, and that's enough. This doesn't happen overnight. You've been practicing the apology for years, maybe decades. The neural pathways are deep. The habit is strong. And there will be moments when you slip back into it, when stress or fear or old triggers make the sorry automatic again. And that's okay. You don't need to be perfect at unlearning this pattern. You don't need to apologize for the fact that healing takes time. So if you're someone who apologizes for your own existence, I want you to know something. This pattern doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you're broken. It means you survived something that required you to make yourself small. It means you developed a strategy that worked in the environment where you learned it. But you're not in that environment anymore. And you don't need that strategy anymore. You can put down the shield of apology. You can stop trying to earn what should have been freely given. You can take up space without justification. You can be imperfect and still worthy. You can exist without apology. And maybe eventually, the only sorry you'll need to say is the one you owe yourself. For all the years you believed you needed to earn your place in the world. For all the times you apologized when you should have stood tall. For all the space you didn't take up because you thought you didn't deserve it. You do. You always did. And you don't need to say sorry for finally believing it.